And from bodybuilding, welcome back to Good Morning Kenya. And we want to talk about the ongoing World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference in Nairobi. It enters the third day. It is the 10th World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference. And that particular conference enters the third day at a time. There are signs that there's no argument being reached, that there's a deadlock, especially with respect to the question of agricultural subsidies. And that's the story that you remember Carol Njenga earlier on we brought to you during the first part of the news bulletin and Good Morning Kenya. This morning we have William Peter Ojonyo. He's the managing director of Keynote Logistics Company Limited. He's a tax expert, and we want to talk about some of these things and what they portend for the country. Are we going to see an agreement between developing countries and developed countries now that there are reports that we are likely to be having a deadlock, as it were? And let's now have a look at that particular story by Carol Njenga, where delegates at the ongoing World Trade Organization's Ministerial Conference want trade ministers and other stakeholders to accelerate negotiations on agricultural subsidies. This, they say, will go a long way in enhancing trade, which plays a key role in economic growth and development, as well as job creation. That story next by Carol Njenga.
Second day of the World Trade Organization 10th Ministerial Conference afternoon session kicked off with delegates urging the WTO members to conclude the Doha Development Agenda and eliminate all agricultural subsidies that have weighed down heavily on developing countries.
A mechanism was established which partially reflects the need to meet the needs of the weakest in the Doha round. However, we are concerned to see the intention to end these achievements in Nairobi. Bolivia would like to highlight this fact and would like to completely reject any measure which undermines what has been achieved for the benefit of the weakest countries in the Doha.
With the rules of farm trade remaining untouched since the establishment of WTO 2 decades ago, least developed countries are expecting to see progress on achieving a fair and market-oriented agricultural trading system.
The adjustment of rules governing the agricultural sector must guarantee the predictability of trade, and they must broaden the possibilities for work and well-being for our peoples, in particular those in rural areas.
Delegates say the huge trade distorting farm subsidies by rich countries have negatively affected millions of poor and subsistence farmers in developing countries.
Scrapping subsidies on agricultural exports in the scope of agricultural negotiations. Furthermore, we need to bear in mind the needs of the weakest members of this organization. That is why we are in favor of a substantial package for the LDCs, and we are also in favor of continuing the work program for SMEs. Thus, it is important that in this MC, the flexibilities that the agricultural agreement provides to developed countries, and has done since 1995, it's important that they are broadened to developing countries.
They also want the agricultural export competition eliminated and enhanced trade fairness on all export measures in order to boost economic growth, especially for developing countries.
An agreement on agricultural export competition is very important indeed to send a message that the days of distortion are numbered.
The representatives are hopeful that the negotiations will be inclusive, balanced, and will strengthen the multilateral trading system.
And that was a report that was filed by Carol Njenga with respect to the question of subsidies. And William, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Just by looking at that particular piece by Carol Njenga, you realize there's some apprehension, especially by developed countries, when it comes to the question of agricultural subsidies. What does this mean?
Thank you. Thank you once more for having me in your program again.
Yes.
Clearly, what the developed countries are doing is to protect their interest, because it's about trade. The developing countries and the least developed countries would like to have a situation where they're given an advantage over the developed countries in terms of having their exports, especially the agricultural
the subsidies?
No, the agricultural product getting into their countries, but given some kind of advantage, where subsidies here may mean they'll be encouraged to export more at lower tariffs, or they will relax the rules of origin, so that then at the end of the day, they have an advantage of having more exports and therefore developing their own countries from home. So basically, it's just about negotiating on how much can I give as a developed countries to help you developed country also come up and closer to me.
So that when we say, when you say that developed countries seem to be protecting their interest, you can as well say that the less developed countries seems to be pushing for their interests in this case.
Which is the truth. You see, the world is not balanced. We would all want to agree that we have developed, we have developing, and we have the least developed. Now, what happens in such negotiations is that whatever you want to agree on as a resolution should take into consideration the fact that we are not balanced, we are not equal. And even in trade, the developed countries are trading better. They are getting more profits than the least developed and the developing. Yet, we are consumers as a globe. So clearly what is going on is the developed are saying we will stand where we are, assuming that we sell to you at 80% and you sell to us at 20%. You try and work hard and get to 30%. We will not give you incentives, we will not give you subsidies. And the least developed are saying, look, our strength is on agriculture. And we are telling you that because we are not as fast as you are now, help us get closer to you by selling more of what we are good at doing, the agricultural products.
And that brings me to the question of the developed countries. Before having that progressive economy, there's something they did. Are developing countries demanding so much when maybe they have not done so much to make their economy vibrant compared to the developed countries?
I think yes and no. All this is about how you package yourself as a country, as a region, and that's why we have trading blocks. We may not be doing enough. We may be asking for too much every day, because these incentives also are time-bound. You not have incentives forever. So the question is, what are we doing as a country, for example, to give incentives to our agricultural farmers, because that's where we are strong. What are we doing to them to enhance productivity? Because that is where our economy lies. So that before long, we should be telling them we are making progress on our agricultural sector. I mean, if we are taxing, how much incentive are we giving ourselves to our own before we go to the world platform and tell them how close can we come? So yes, they were where we are at some point, and I think it's about leadership, it's about packaging, it's about incentives, it's about looking at the bigger picture of the economy at the end of the day.
Yeah. But then the question will be, here you have a situation where the developed countries are saying, listen, we're not going to relent. As a matter of fact, we should do away with some of these thorny issues from the agenda if we are to reach an agreement in Nairobi. Developing countries saying, listen, we're not going to cede ground. These are some of the issues we want our concerns addressed. In fact, if you look at some of the dailies, Deputy President saying, listen, the developed countries must take into consideration the issues being raised by the least developed countries. So which way are we going to have these talks? It's only today and tomorrow, by the way, before these talks come to an end.
I think these talks had many other agendas, and this was just one of the agendas that they wanted included in the talks.
But thorny, as it sounds.
Very thorny, because it is about giving and taking. It is about win-win or lose-win, if I may borrow from the words of the Deputy President. They believe that the least developed and developing countries are in a lose-win, and therefore the win here are the developed. But the developed are also saying, for how long will you be talking about this thing? What are you coming with on the table that would help us also cede ground? Do we want to be talking about you wanting us to give you subsidies and you're not telling us how much you're doing on your own to also give us an incentive to give you the subsidies? So it will be a mark timing kind of program in the WTO. And to me, what we should be looking at is what are we doing as a nation, as a region, as a trading bloc, to then go with on the table and tell them, listen, this should be the agenda and this is what we have. So I think we are kind of looking like we were ambushed into the WTO.
In fact, that's what I wanted to pose, because it looks like the way from where you sit, the African countries went to this particular body or organization, but they were not prepared to join the body. They are not ready to do so.
No, the body is about trade.
Yes.
The body is about balance of trade and how we will protect the trader and how we will protect trade. That is the essence of WTO.
Yes.
The question is, do we want to keep talking about this baby who is still crawling 20 years down the line? And what is the baby doing so that we can help the baby stand and at some point walk? I think that is the argument from the developed countries. And my argument as a person is, what are we doing? Today we have the WTO talks. What does the farmer in Kenya know about WTO?
In fact, now that you talk about that, let's take that story that was done by Irene Mchuma before we continue. It's about how do Kenyans understand WTO? And you'll be amazed, some of them even don't know what WTO means. Have a look at this particular piece before we continue with this discussion.
I've never heard about it. I've got no idea about it. Yeah. Okay.
Unaelewa hii mkutano inahusu nini?
This is a representation of many Kenyans. Kenyans who know there is a big event being held in Nairobi, but have no idea what the event is all about.
For now, I don't have much information about it. Yeah.
You haven't heard about WTO, you don't know what impact it's going to have to our country?
I have not done a research on that.
Do you understand what WTO means?
WTO, I'm not understanding too much, but what I'm understanding, I'm just understanding they are just coming because of the farming and also something like that. Yeah.
To some, the 10th World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference is an event meant to bring good tidings to Kenya, but with no specifics.
It's basically a conference to discuss the economic structure of the world or something like that.
Hawa wageni wamekuja kwa sababu nchi yetu iko na maendeleo mzuri na watatuletea mambo mzuri na tutashirikiana na hao.
To others, the WTO is a tourism attraction. It is, however, not so far from the truth.
Hii mkutano naielewa vizuri na ni mkutano ambayo itatuletea faida kubwa kama Wakenya wenyewe watafuatilia ile mambo ya utalii na mambo ya nchi yao na mambo ya uhusiano bora katika nchi zingine na kibiashara, kilimo na mambo ya hapa Kenya.
All the same, there are those who have little know-how of the three-day forum and are optimistic it will boost the country's economy in a diverse manner.
I think it's going to help us improve our economy. Now that the country's economy is a bit high, I think it's going to give us a solution to such.
Coming here will give us exposure as a country. We'll be able to have an equal plate in terms of trade. We'll have, I think, new terms of trade. Kenya being a very, very vital, in a very vital place in Africa, we'll have a voice to represent Africa the way we'd like Africa to be represented in terms of trading.
So what is WTO? The World Trade Organization is an international intergovernmental organization dealing with the formulation and implementation of international trade rules. The WTO came into existence in 1995 and also deals with the arbitration of trade disputes between members. Simply put, all countries need the World Trade Organization platform to ensure that the rules and regulations each country sets individually promotes the ease of doing business across borders so as to promote global economic growth. Kenya is the first African country to host the WTO Ministerial Conference.
Irene Mchuma for that piece. Is it surprising to you, William, that if you look at all people that were interviewed there, about 2 or 3 seem to understand what WTO is?
Yes, it is, because, I mean, that gives you the level of ignorance we have, unfortunately. And it beats logic that, you know, we are the first African country to host WTO. Yet we did not do enough even to sensitize our own.
But at KBC Channel 1, we've been doing this for a whole week. People not watching some of these pieces we've been doing. O'Brien Kman went all the way to Geneva and did a very comprehensive piece about what has been happening. And we've been doing all this WTO talks, talking about that, the hashtag, all these discussions with John Jacob Kiori and the entire team. And
yeah,
I will get to information.
As media, you have done your best. But I would say sensitization goes beyond the media. Sensitization goes beyond having it in the papers. It is about, for example, the minister concerned having a way of reaching the farmer who would then know that, listen, I need to concentrate on this because this will inform my business. WTO is about the economy, the world economy. Trickle it down, it's about the Kenyan economy. Trickle it down, it's about the county economy. So what did we do to sensitize the beneficiary, who in this case, and more sensitive now is the agricultural agenda. So who is talking to us about what we need to do? But having said that, I realize some of us know what WTO is all about, and a good way to understand that we can get there at some point. That
it will bring some good tidings to the country.
Yes.
But then the question of, if we look at the situation on the ground and what's happening at KCC and the standoff over some of these issues, especially the agricultural subsidies, where and how can the least developed or developing countries speak from? How can they approach the whole issue so that at the end of the day, they don't come out of those talks empty-handed? Because this is an opportunity, the first ever meeting to be done on African soil.
Yeah, I think without going back and crying over spilled milk, what we need to do now as a country is, would we want to concentrate on the bloc, and in this case I'm talking about the East African community, being a trading bloc, so that we have a position. But now that the talks are getting to an end, I think today or tomorrow should be the last day.
Shouldn't be tomorrow the last day.
We may not achieve much from this particular conference. We may not get much as take home, but we need to have it as a lesson that what are we supposed to do? What can we do for better preparation next time? Or what can we do towards the next WTO conference? Because WTO is about arbitration of trade. It is about economic growth. It is about understanding balanced trade. So we should think about ourselves before we get into these talks. I mean, we may not have much out of this, truth be told, but we can do something beyond this.
Germany, Canada, and Italy are some of the countries saying, listen, now that we're having issues, for example, to do with the subsidies, why can't we put aside some of these thorny issues and see what is it? Because there are other issues being discussed during this conference. Do you buy the idea that let's put aside some of these thorny issues, for example, the question of subsidies, and then look at what else can we achieve through this meeting?
I would buy that. I would buy that. And don't mistake me to be unpatriotic.
Because the question will be, then when will we ever address the thorny issues if we're not going
to? It should be a lesson that can we be better prepared, you know, so that then when we go and argue our case, we have facts on the ground. Why is it taking long for us to convince the developed countries about the need to have the subsidies be part of the agenda, and conclusively so? It is because we did not make enough, we did not do enough lobbying, we did not have facts on the table, because, you know, numbers will always not lie. If you say this is what we are doing, and we would like this done for this period, and by the end of this period we expect to have this result, and therefore we can do away with the subsidies, nobody will refuse that. But because we are just saying we want the subsidies, and we don't look like we're having time frames for how long will I feed you on milk? My milk. I mean, you need to tell me, give me a month or 2 months, because I'm planning to buy my own cow. So I think we were not prepared. But having said that, I would buy the idea of saying, if we are not making headways, then we need a take home from this WTO conference in Nairobi, and remember, it's the first one in Africa, would better have something that will be more substantial, something that will be easier to agree on as the globe, rather than concentrate on what we may not achieve. So my idea would be, let's put it aside and look at what is achievable so that we have something to tell Africa, something to tell East Africa, something to tell the world that this is what we achieved from the Nairobi conference.
From the Nairobi conference. Another very, very interesting thing and very thorny, it appears, is what they're calling Doha Roundtable. What is all this about Doha Roundtable, and what does it mean?
I think this is the genesis of the
subsidies.
Of the subsidies, of this agenda that is thorny. It began from Doha, and the idea was it was set aside for the next conference. And the idea basically was the third world countries, the developed and the least, the developing and the least developed countries, have been coming on the table with a suggestion. They have been coming on the table with a take-home that they would want to go back with to enhance the agricultural product vis-a-vis the global trade, so that the least developed will be given an advantage of having their agricultural products sold at a better tax regime and tariff from the recipient developed country, so that would then spur more export from the supply countries. And they did not reach an agreement because from Doha, they were supposed to have something that would be take home for the least developed and the developing countries. And it was then deferred for the next conference, which is now in Nairobi. But the question is, what were they doing towards Nairobi?
Because that, you look at that time frame, if we deferred from Doha, we are now going to defer from Nairobi. When will we ever have an argument in relation to this? And we need to tread, we need to ensure that we move forward as a country and as a region and as the African continent.
We have, and that is the basis of the World Trade Organization platform, that you come prepared, we talk about business, see the facts, and you have a take home. If you're not prepared, you not have a take home. So, and it's about give and take, it's about win-win. And the developed countries are saying, we have worked hard for our position. Work hard for your position. Show us that you're working hard in the list. So we may wallow, we may make noise, we may say we want to have a take home, but we may be doing it because, it may be taking this direction because we were least prepared. So
we were least prepared. It will be interesting, and I'll just ask my director to prepare that piece that talks about Dr. Mukisa Kitui, who is the United Nations Trade and Development Secretary General, and is calling on African countries they should not be fearful, to prepare and ensure that we are in a position that we can articulate some of these issues, and along the way they're going to be addressed. But before that clip comes your way, and as we prepare, you are a tax expert, William, and the whole question of tariffs seems to be also a thorny issue in this particular discussion. Why?
Yeah, because tariff is the basis of trade.
Yes.
Yeah, you would only trade when the tariffs favor you. And we have two types of tariffs. We have the normal tariffs that have been put in place to help us understand what we need to pay in terms of customs, in terms of tax collection. But we also have non-tariff barriers. These non-tariff barriers are shadows within the tariffs that make it difficult. So these are the things that need to be gotten out of the way to ensure smooth trade. And the tariffs is about what, for example, what is the tariff for Kenya in importation or exportation of a specific product? What are they putting in place? And has the world then ratified? Now, when you have a world ratified tariff on specific issues, then those tariffs either favor or may not favor the trader. Yeah.
Do we, if you look at, because as we prepare that clip, one thing you'll realize is the question of imbalance in terms of importation, the amount you pay while importing or exporting some of the products, and there are those concerns that the imbalance is so high if you compare to Africa and if you compare to some of the Asian countries. Do you see trade between African countries and, say, developed countries overcome some of these tariff barriers and maybe challenges that come? I'm told that that clip is ready. We can have a look at what Dr. Mukisa Kitui is talking about in relation to some of the challenges that we are having in the Nairobi conference, and then proceed with this discussion.
In June this year, during the AU's 25th Heads of Government Summit held in Johannesburg, South Africa, negotiations for the creation of a continental free trade area were launched. Now, what is the significance of this in terms of intra-African trade, one might ask?
There will be an additional $1 trillion to world trade. But on that, Africa will lose out about 38 billion. Creating a continental free trade area, first of all, will take advantage of the existing, like East African Community, COMESA, SADC, put all of them together, make Africa trade more.
CFTA has the potential of totally transforming how business is done, how trade is done, and can transform the developmental prospects of Africa.
Already, a tripartite trade bloc has been established, bringing together EAC, COMESA, and SADC. Uncertainty, however, still remains on whether a deal will be reached in time to create the continental free trade area, allowing liberalization of trade in goods and services before the 2017 deadline, as some countries are still reluctant to open up their markets.
When you negotiate regional integration and free trade areas, usually the countries that are most fearful are the smallest and most vulnerable economies for deindustrialization, for loss of, because of limited competitiveness. But you know, from where I sit, from what I saw no exchange during the tripartite signing in Sharm el-Sheikh, the African reality is the main stumbling blocks are actually not necessarily the smallest areas.
For a long time, African countries have preferred external markets through multilateral trade agreements. Case in point is the US-backed AGOA and EU's efforts for growth, overlooking trade within. For instance, in 2014, countries under AGOA exported goods worth 50 billion shillings to the American market. Africa is also being encouraged to allow free movement of skilled manpower, as 60% of the continent's population is the youth. High cost of logistics has also been cited as taking a toll on the continent's growth prospects, a factor which is making Africa uncompetitive.
Regardless of whatever agreement is arrived at MC10, the reality is that it costs $2,000 to ship a container from Africa to Europe, okay? Whereas the cost of shipping a container from Asia is $900. Intra-African trade presently stands at only 12% of the total African trade. To my mind, the potential is absolutely huge.
In addition, poor infrastructure and high tariffs are also inhibiting trade.
And so, William, how do you make of that, especially the question of shipping a container from Africa and Asia? Look at the kind of dollars that you spend.
Yeah, that tells you that we are making it harder, even as a region, to ship in terms of freight because of the small fees that we have alongside what should actually be a very simple point A to point B payment. Mm-hmm. That it will be $900, for example, from Asia, and it will be $2,000 from Africa, from East Africa, from Mombasa for that matter. It is basically because before that container leaves Mombasa, there are too many fees to be paid. And therefore, that is not an incentive, in fact, to have exports leave Mombasa for other destinations. Now, those are the things we should be addressing before going to
WTO.
Yes,
and
that
pushing.
What are we doing to make it easier for our traders, for our farmers. Because trade, for example, what barriers are we removing? How much are we enhancing service to then give an incentive to the local trader in Africa? And one of the speakers said, we should then think of coming together more. We should then talk from the same script more as a region. And he has mentioned SADC. He has mentioned East African Community. He has mentioned COMESA. We should have these blocks that then will give us a better position of arguing our case when it comes to the world round table. So clearly, and listening to Dr. Muhisa Kitui, he's saying that we should not be fearful. But you know, you are only as fearful as you look because of how much power you have. So if you do not have power yourself, if you are not prepared, if you know you are as powerful as your pocket.
You know, when we talk about those fears, and you come to East Africa region and you look at the fears that abound in some of the countries. For example, when you talk about East African community integration, Tanzania has been somehow reluctant. The dominance by Kenya, for example, and the same fear now translating to WTO. Does Tanzania have a legitimate reason then to fear that if we join this particular community or units, we may be victims of dominance?
You know, there is very little you can do about dominance. Once you're domineering, that's what you are. But again, you work towards being dominant. So Kenya has been working towards being dominant in the recent past. Of late, it's not been very good for Kenya, that I can tell you for sure, because if you look at even our trading rates, they have really come down. And basically, it is policy. Policy will enhance trade, or policy will reduce trade. And everybody would want to be dominant. Tanzania may have their reasons for not wanting to come running into the East African community with Kenya being the major player. And the idea is, what is Tanzania doing to ensure that they are better placed to then run with Kenya to be the dominant players? And what is Kenya doing to maintain its position? That is competition, healthy for that matter. And then, therefore, if we can bring our weaknesses and our strengths together and have a common ground and synergize our energies, then for a fact, what we will be doing is that we shall be forming a strong trading bloc with strong non-tariff barriers, with strong incentives, even tax incentives, to ensure that then we shall be listened to when we go for these talks as a region. So we may not want to look at Tanzania now as being slow, because they have their own reasons. They're also saying that Kenya, for example, is pushing its agenda more than the region's agenda. But the common man is also saying the government is pushing its agenda against our own agenda because of the tax increments coming left, right, center. So we need to go back into ourselves and check, what are we doing? How much are we moving with everybody on board, from the taxpayer, the trader for that matter, to the government, to the region, so that then we can talk from a platform of unity, if you ask me.
Earlier on, we did talk about some of these barriers, and we talked about tariff barriers, and you referred to some of them as shadow barriers within within the trade barriers. How easy is it to really do away with some of these barriers to enhance trade among member states?
Very easy. It's just policy. For example, I'll give you one non-tariff barrier. One of the non-tariff barriers is the many roadblocks between Mombasa, for example, and Kampala, or Kigali, for that matter.
I thought some of them had been moved.
Thought is the word. Because you will still have the roadblocks. You will still have your trucks stopped too many times. You will still have the way bridges stop you too many times. You will still have duplication of the same service by many different government agencies. Those are the non-tariff barriers that must be done away with, because the freer flow of trade, the better, both for the consumer and the taxpayer. So really what we are saying is we must work on these other barriers alongside other tariff barriers that may make trade harder, so that when we speak of going to the table and saying, give us subsidies, for example, we would then say, this is what we are coming with. Remember, we had this percentage, we had this rate of non-tariff barriers. We have reduced it to 1%. So we will only make it better if we also address our own issues.
And that is as far as the question of, say, roadblocks is concerned. But then when you talk about those barriers in terms of finances, the charges, we talked about shipping a container from Asia to, say, the US, and then compare it from Mombasa to the US, or Mombasa to Rwanda, and all those kind of things. How easy is it when it comes to monetary, you know, barriers, for example, the amount charged?
We have, as a country, as a region, and I must congratulate the development partners who come along to help us do many researches on how then would we reduce the barriers that are existing, to reduce on the cost of doing business in the region. We are identifying the barriers, but we are doing very little to remove the barriers. You can imagine today in Mombasa, for example, it is about efficiency of having cargo out of the port on time, because you want to export this cargo and you want to import cargo into the country. You are using just one port to make sure that these things move, and you are using also the road railage, the road and the rail to have your cargo either into the country or out of the country. We are, as a country, for example, as a region, we are not doing enough to make this flow efficient. Initially, we had other excuses, that it was because other government agencies were not doing their work on time, and therefore we came up with single windows, we came up with the quick enhancement of having entries passed, and so on and so forth. But you make 5 steps today and you make 10 tomorrow. So you go back again to where you were, if anything worse. And this is what should be addressed first. I will give you a very practical example. It would cost you $1,000 to ship a container, for example, into the country from Japan. It will cost you $2,000 or actually it will cost you $3,000 to take that container by road from Mombasa to Kampala.
So Japan
3 times what you have spent between Japan and Mombasa. The question is, why would you want to spend that on the road? We have not talked about the other fees that is levied at the ports and so on. I mean, it's crazy. And we are doing very little to ensure that we make it easier for the importer, we make it easier for the consumer, and therefore enhance trade. That is the basis of WTO.
And that's the basis of WTO. Even as that particular conference comes to an end tomorrow, and William, assuming that I hired you to be the consultant, advisor of that particular conference, and with some of these hurdles being experienced, what will be your wisdom? What will be your counsel to that particular conference so that we make a headway despite the challenges that we seem to be encountering during the talks?
I would advise that we go back to our house, lock the doors, and then try and comp out the barriers that we have ourselves in trade. We remove the barriers, in fact, in incentives that we might be having, that we might not be giving the trader in the region, to ensure that, first of all, we make it as easy as possible for the whole chain, from the producer, from the farmer, to the exporter, so that then we would come out of this house and say, we are moving in one direction. We have done enough, this far, so good. Now can we go out there and tell the world that with this in hand, and tell the region with this in hand, we can only argue our case for better subsidies, for example, or for better negotiations, for better trade, so that then we will be having something on our hand. But going out there and our house is still misty may not help much.
May not help. William Peter Ojonyo, thank you for getting time to be with us this morning. I want to believe, of course, William Peter Ojonyo is the managing director of Keynote Logistics Company Limited, that is based here in Nairobi, and is a tax expert. I want to believe that your wisdom has gone a long way in empowering Kenyans, the jargons notwithstanding, and that by the time Irene Muchuma goes back to the streets today, to try and get the views of Kenyans in relation to WTO. They'll be having those answers with them with this kind of discussion. Continue watching KBC Channel 1. We did tell you that we are the host broadcaster. We've been breaking some of these things for you and ensure that you get in touch and see how this conference is going to impact to your life after it has come to an end, and how you can leverage on some of the things that are happening there to ensure you empower yourself, economically speaking, and business-wise and all that. We are taking that break, and when we come back, Samuel Njoroge and I will be here to wrap up the week. It has been days of El Nino, some sort of, and all those kind of things, and Samuel Njoroge is literally warming up. So see you after the short break. Stay tuned.